a real delight to have this panel with us for this conversation about island states. And as someone who lives on a very, very big island on the other side of the Indian Ocean, we've got a conversation here that stretches all the way across through Seychelles, through Sri Lanka, through the Maldives, and over to South Africa. So thank you all for being here with us for this conversation. And a great segue from the Innovation Island Summit in Sri Lanka. I can say it was a fantastic dialogue. Thanks for having us there as well. So this panel is about navigating uncertainty navigating uncertainty and really hearing from people who live in this region and unpacking what some of those challenges are at the moment. So I'm thinking, things like climate change, the blue economy, how that can address some of those climate change issues, security, geopolitics. This is all sort of happens here in the Indian Ocean, and my panellists here are going to help us really understand what they're doing to address some of these challenges. So I'll start with Aisha, who is from the Maldives, and I'd really like to hear from you, perhaps a starting point for this conversation around climate and security challenges, and perhaps you could contextualise this from the Maldives perspective for us.
Thank you, RF, for giving me this opportunity, and also thank you, President Thabo Mbeki here. And my question is, how can island states climate security challenges in regional leadership, right? Okay, as an island state, we do not experience climate and security as two different files. They happen to us at the same time on the same shoreline. So the Maldives is perhaps the world's clearest example of how a small nation can lead with big conviction. We are the lowest lying nation on the planet, yet we are also the strongest climate voices on the table. So one of the defining moments was when the President Nasheed held an underwater cabinet meeting in 2009. It was one of the defining moments, and it was something as a warning to the world that if the largest countries and the largest emitters doesn't stop this, doesn't reduce, islands like us, countries like us could vanish. So right now, as we speak, we know that climate change is real. And we know that we have done, as a leader, whatever that we could. We built one of the world's most sustainable tuna fisheries. We banned single-use plastics in stages. We've invested in coral restorations. We protected our marine areas, and we also is one of the examples of eco-friendly tourism. So we adopted this early because we don't have the luxury of delaying this. And this is, as we speak, we know that 97% of the country does not have any fresh water. And 80% of our budgets are going to water desalination, climate mitigations. So this is not fair for us as a small country because we are like the passive smokers of the emissions that we did not burn. And this is coming from the bigger nations, which they are addicted to carbon emissions. So as a small country, we know that we've led and we could be one of the leaders leading this over the tables. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ashith. And it's been very clear that the Maldives has had a very forward posture on addressing some of these issues and bringing that reality to the fore. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. Malshi, let's go over to the Seychelles, another beautiful place. Can you contextualise this from a climate and security perspective in the Seychelles, and what is the Seychelles doing to address some of these challenges?
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Erin. Good morning, everyone. Very similar to my colleague here from the Maldives, Seychelles has never lived in a period of certainty. So for us, navigating uncertainty, that is a lived reality. Coming from the Seychelles, I can tell you that pretty much all of our challenges is an experience that is basically being shared across the region. So let me just share with you some of the challenges. We are extremely remotely located in the Indian Ocean. The population of the Seychelles, believe it or not, is 120,000 people. That's it. And so you would immediately understand the constraints that come about as a result of having that small population base. We are also very overly reliant on two very narrow economic bases, being tourism and fisheries. And against that backdrop, you've now got us experiencing disproportionately the negative impacts of climate change. But what we've done, and I think what we've done very well, is that we've taken these vulnerabilities and we've tried to turn them into opportunities for leadership. So around 2015, 2018, the Seychelles turned to its ocean space in order to transform its sustainable development pathway. So just as background, we have 455 square kilometers of land, but we have an exclusive economic zone of 1.3 million square kilometers of water. So we are much more water than land when it comes to the Seychelles Islands. And what we tried to do when we launched our blue economy model back then was we tried to embrace three approaches. Equity for everyone, so leave no one behind in our development pathway. Economic growth for everyone as well, but that should be balanced with environmental conservation. And essentially, what we've also tried to do with our model is that we try to find pioneering ways to move forward. So in 2015, we launched the world's first blue bond. This was valued at $15 million. And we also had a debt for nature swap. Blended financing, innovative approaches, because the Seychelles is considered to be a high-income country, one of the few to form part of Africa, and therefore we are not eligible for concessional financing. And secondly, we also declared 30% of our waters a marine protected area, much along the lines of what Maldives is trying to do. So we reached that SDG target about 10 years ahead of when we were supposed to. But all of this has been done with partnerships. So what we have found in Seychelles is that together we're going to go much further. Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, I think that's a really great segue into, thinking about partnerships, because as small island states, right, like you can't go it alone. You're going to have to partner together. Malshi, can you unpack some of those partnerships and what Maldives is focused on from a partnership framework? Seychelles.
Both
Getting
islands.
all my countries wrong today. I was doing that earlier as well.
Both islands are gorgeous, so it's perfectly understandable. For Seychelles, what we found is that the partnerships that work for us are partnerships that are very smart, partnerships that are nimble, mission-driven, if you will. And these kinds of partnerships also help us provide stability to the region. So I'll give you a few examples. I'll use some of the larger partners as well, which is obviously India. A massive partner for the Seychelles, has assisted us in a number of different sectors, be it infrastructure, maritime security, education and training. Sri Lanka as well has set up a route between which Seychelles students can get maritime education through Sri Lankan institutions. And then we come down to the regional partnerships, those that are extremely nimble, those that require a level of collaboration that is perhaps, there's not been seen perhaps before. And to this, I will point to our closest neighbor, Mauritius. You would anticipate that we share the same problems, being very close partners. But what we have done is that we have signed a joint maritime agreement to actually work together in our shared extended continental shelf. So it's one of the first that's been signed for the Indian Ocean. It's been there for about a couple of years now. And it speaks to the level of collaboration that can happen between countries that are like-minded and kind of follow a rules-based order, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Do you partner much with Australia at all?
That is such a good question. And I'm really glad you raised it.
That's the reason
I'm really glad you raised it.
We now have a special envoy for Indian Ocean affairs.
Yes, you do.
And it's an interesting role that's been appointed because there's so much scope in that, right? And that's something that, there's opportunity there for further partnerships where if we're not already engaging, that's a pathway now that we actually didn't have before for partnerships.
Agreed and agreed. And something that is worth exploring further. With Australia, it's really just education opportunities that's being afforded to Seychelles students right now. There's a lot of us over there in Australia getting our higher education degrees, but it's a fantastic opportunity for more advancement. Absolutely.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that one. Okay, let's move over here now to South Africa. And I'm really interested to hear from you, Janitha, about some of how you see this island conversation that we're having here from South Africa's perspective, because you mentioned earlier that you have many uninhabited islands. You've got a range of security issues that you're facing here as well in that context. So what's your perspective and what's your take on some of these issues that you're trying to navigate here from a South African perspective?
Thanks for that, Erin, and good morning to you. Well, actually, in terms of South Africa, we're definitely not a small island development state. We do own islands, but purely for research purposes. So we have 2 islands which are actually fall within the responsibility of the Ministry for Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and that's Marion and Guff Islands. So we don't have permanent inhabitants on those islands, and usually you have research voyages taking place, surveys, etc., because the biodiversity is obviously, it's a pristine environment, intact, etc. And then we have Robben Island, which is also a tourist destination, and it's like 10 to 12 kilometers out of Cape Town. With regard to safety and security, I mean, one of the challenges that we've had, given the fact that we have an exclusive economic zone of more than 1.5 million kilometers into the ocean, is, for example, abalone poaching. Yep. And abalone's a marine species that takes very long to grow to reach a point where they can be harvested. And more specifically, we have a lot of Asian countries that see it as a delicacy, and as a result, the abalone population has been diminishing. So this has been one of our major challenges. So we've been actually delving into drone technology to actually see how this could actually help us. And it's been quite successful for some time. It just depends on the potential of these drones as well. But over and above that, in terms of the economics, I mean, we launched our Operation Pakisa looking at the blue economy way back in 2014. And in terms of cooperation between, for example, Mauritius and Seychelles, we have a lot of South Africans as tourists, going to the islands itself. So from a responsible global citizen perspective, obviously being part of or party to many of the international conventions, it's our responsibility to ensure, for example, ending single-use plastic, looking at microplastics, on land or land-based litter management, which invariably ends up into our watercourses and then into the ocean itself. Ensuring that our populations, marine populations, we have surveys that we undertake in terms of the humpback whale, the African penguin, etc. So it's an ongoing activity that the department, obviously in collaboration with other ministries, are quite keen to, which have been pursuing and quite keen to do it in the future as well. But regionally, I think cooperation's invaluable. You have to take into consideration, especially with marine plastic litter, if you have regional cooperation, it has to be something that is on an ongoing basis, and each country has to play its part. Because if you're looking for the end goal in terms of limiting plastic pollution, marine plastic pollution, or marine litter for that matter, you have to ensure that each country in that region is playing its part. Or you're going to miss the end goal, and that's to prevent marine pollution at the end of the day. But I think let me stop here and we'll continue.
I think that point that you made there about partnerships and everybody playing their role is interesting. I want to be a little bit provocative and ask you, where are the gaps in that cooperation? And if you were to say this is where we as South Africa need more support in terms of being effective in the region in some of these key areas like plastics, where are those gaps now?
I think many in the room who may be familiar with the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, negotiations actually stalled. That's an international, a process that was driven. South Africa is very proactive and participatory in that regard. So from that perspective, the messaging that's being sent, through obviously affected or lobby parties who have otherwise, interests in terms of still pursuing petrochemicals and ensuring that plastics here to stay, you're going to be having those challenges. But from a security perspective, given the fact that we have such an exclusive economic zone which spans quite far, I think patrolling becomes one of the limitations. And I think maybe with the small island developing states, you would have similar challenges in terms of patrolling your exclusive economic zones and ensuring that you don't have illegal poaching, et cetera, taking place. Nonetheless, I think the cooperation that kicks in with international partnerships is where we can actually have a success story coming out of it. The International Maritime Organization, together with Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, they've been quite vocal in that regard. They've been partnering with countries in terms of minimizing or trying to reduce marine litter, et cetera. So both from a security perspective as well as from a climate sustainability perspective, the measures that we put in place requires that type of regional as well as international cooperation.
Yes, yeah, that's very interesting reflection. I'm going to go a little bit further over the Indian Ocean back our way to Sri Lanka. Kind of our way, they're still quite far from us, but sort of, to Sri Lanka. So Shivan, I think Sri Lanka's at a very interesting inflection point in time at the moment. You're also a bit of a geopolitical hotbed as well. There's a lot of competition playing out in Sri Lanka, and the security of Sri Lanka is really essential to the security of South Asia as well, and I know that Australia sees Sri Lanka in that way as well. Tell us a little bit about this geopolitics and how this is, playing out, and what some of those challenges are in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Erin, and I'd like to respectfully recognize the presence of President Mbeki and also appreciate the opportunity ORF presents to have these difficult conversations. I think just the Africans in this room will understand the centuries of conflict that you've experienced because of the resources, the treasures that you have beneath your soil. And I think it's a different continent, but in a sense, the same struggle. But except that the challenge is slightly different for islands like Sri Lanka, that our treasures are beneath the waves. And also those territories, the dichotomy here is the territories are also part of the global commons. And how do we then somehow also protect our national sovereignty whilst also ensuring freedom of navigation and things like that. And so this makes it really interesting because if you take the example of Sri Lanka, just as Malshi mentioned, Sri Lanka's land mass is only around 65,610 square kilometers. But our exclusive economic zone extends to 500,000 square kilometers. You said Seychelles was over 1 million. Sri Lanka also lays claim to double that ocean territory, which, according to international treaty law and solid science, it should get. And so, if we are serious about returning to a rules-based order, then respect the rules. And given those circumstances, these small island states suddenly become ocean republics with access and ownership to massive amounts of natural resources. Now, why is this important? It's important because we've been talking about a new geopolitical model. On day one, we spoke about and we heard about the dismantle of an existing order and the creation of a new one. Now, if the creation of this new world order if it's been done by the creators of the old world order, and if the imperatives remain the same, then I'm not sure how different it's going to be from where we've been, a neo-colonialism in a sense. Because if AI is going to be driving this new future, then what is AI really? Is it actually artificial? Is it even intelligent? What it is really is a massive physical process, which is going to eat up and consume enormous amounts of energy in order for it to drive this process. And the only way this processing power and this energy can be sustained is if capital is poured into it. And that capital can come only from where it already exists. And so will it perpetuate a existing system and further solidify it? And how this is relevant to islands like Sri Lanka is because if the resources for these systems and for this future exists within these so-called global commons, then they're going to be contested just like Africa was contested for centuries for its resources. And so we need to understand, I think that's why I'm fearful of the future in a sense for a nation like Sri Lanka, because it's a blessing and a curse to have access to these millions and billions of dollars in resources within our territorial waters. Just to give you another example, Sri Lanka also sits beside one of the busiest ocean highways in the world. We see up to 60,000 ocean-going vessels pass by our southern coast every single year. And that's about 30 to 40% of global commerce. So a stable Sri Lanka is incredibly important for a stable world, for stable business. Now, you can take your ships further south of Sri Lanka. You can do that. You can move it maybe 30, 40 nautical miles away from Sri Lanka, but it's going to cost you billions of dollars. And so the price that Sri Lanka pays for that is enormous. Just moving it a few kilometers south will save 95% of our whales, of our marine life. The pollution is not even accounted for. 2% of global emission of CO2 is from ships. And so with 60,000 of these things passing by Sri Lanka's southern coast, a considerable amount of Sri Lanka's CO2 emissions comes from this international shipping highway. Now, it's incredibly important that Sri Lanka remains stable and strong, because even though you do pass through the EEZ, it's in our interest as well. We don't get a part of this commerce, but we understand that it's a blessing of geography that we are right next to this international maritime billion-dollar highway. And so, unfortunately, there is no way of any kind of reparation to be paid for Sri Lanka, for the, not just Sri Lanka, but the Maldives and these small, so-called small island nations that take much of the damage that is caused by these highways. So I think if we have to move forward, the one thing that I appreciate this platform is because we have the opportunity to discuss and have a seat at the table as our own destinies are being designed. And that's very important, because if that doesn't happen, and if we are continued to be looked at as small island states and not ocean republics that we are, then I'm afraid we are perpetuating a system that already exists, and how has that worked for us? So these are my thoughts. Thank you.
Oh, it's a lot of thoughts. So many thoughts. Shivan, something that, yes, yeah. I think you're probably applauding the thing that I've written down here that you just said, which was very interesting. We talk about small island states, we talk about small island developing states, and you said not thinking about us as the ocean republic that we are. And I really like that reframing of what your countries are and who you are as these sovereign countries in this region. The point you made about shipping in particular kind of goes back to another ORF conference a few weeks ago in Mumbai, where there's a lot of conversation about the way the shipping industry is actually quite a slow industry to change. So I can't even speak today. Electrification of the shipping industry, automation of the shipping industry. It's really, really slow progress. And that's something that is obviously impacting you from an environmental perspective across a whole range of different areas. And then the other thing I really wanted to pick up on that you talked about was this new world order. And this idea of, but it was just being created by the same people, then you sort of end up in the same position. And I just wanted to point to one model of one relatively new international organisation that's trying to address this structure and how they approach multilateralism. So it's the International Fund for Public Interest Media, where they're actually co-founded by someone from the global north and the global south, which are also very problematic terms, as we all know. They're an international organisation in France, but also in Ghana, and they have on their council, depending on how these categories are defined, but countries from the global south are that they're making they're decision makers at the table, and I feel like it's one of the few new models that's emerging that's actually giving people a real stake when you are. Rather than just being dominated by the same players, whether it's the US or the global north in general, just again acknowledging that they're all problematic terms. So I think that's a very interesting model to start to look at, and I think that's the only way any effective new multilateralism can sort of emerge. It's a very particular issue, but yeah. Anyway, I just want to make sure that everyone here has time to ask questions. So if you do have questions for our panel, please start thinking about them now. I'm going to ask a couple more questions to our panellists and then we'll turn over to the room. So if you can get your thinking caps on, that would be really, really helpful. I perhaps want to go back to you, Ashith. You were talking about, you were sort of contextualising what's happening in the Maldives. A country like yours, it doesn't have a seat at the table at the G20, for example. And what would be the one thing that the Maldives is asking from the rest of the world when it comes to, your future as a country? You used the word vanish at the beginning of our session today, which I wrote down. I thought it was a really powerful framing. What is the one thing that you need as a country in future partnerships or in the partnerships that you have?
So talking about that, I think the global frameworks and partnerships, this should go beyond declarations. It's always the black and white written, but when it comes to the partnerships and the funding, I think, we are not walking the talk. So we need more funding for this, and we need to take climate harm as something serious, because for us, national security is this, like protecting our reef is national security for us. And, managing the plastic pollution is national security for us. Also, the maritime governance is my Sri Lankan counterpart said. It's national security for us. So these are the things that we cannot just separate. These files has to be together, and if there's any frameworks, this has to be aligned with the frameworks. As I said before, I wanted to emphasize that countries like us, we may be tiny, but our voices are strong. And today we are not talking from the shorelines. We have emerged, and our countries, as I speak, our country, we are 98% literate country, and my counterpart, 98% literate country. Our people, our population may be smaller, but we have voices, and we speak for the humanity. It is today the Maldives, or Sri Lanka, or Seychelles, Mauritius, but tomorrow it is the world. So we cannot just stop and think about it or write it as frameworks or, do something on the table. But we need to move beyond these tables, beyond the declarations. We have to come forefront and do something which is practically viable. That brings, actionable, frameworks, and plus something that can be applied real lives, that is working for us. And this is not fair because, see, we are the passive smokers, as I said. We didn't burn it. And this was burned by the people who are enjoying the luxury of living, and we are suffering from that. If the world has, codes for trade, codes for finance, codes for arbitration, why not a code for the climate, a tribunal for a climate harm? Because climate harm has to be taken seriously as a harm to the humanity. See, countries like us, we are tiny, but the harm that the larger emissions countries is doing is not fair for us. And it is not fair for our people. It's not fair for our generations to come, our children. We need to protect our sea because our oceans are everything for us. And we cannot just rely on funding that is coming, which is barely minimum survival. We are not beggars. And we want we want this court to be a tribunal where smaller countries like us can go watch to challenge the bigger nations and, get something which is in return and take this harm seriously. Because any harm to the humans is a harm, and any harm caused by this emission and climate change, this is also harm for us, and it is harm for the humanity. And I wanted this to be taken seriously by the world.
This is a very interesting topic. So from an Australian perspective, where we sit both in the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean, a lot of our foreign policy and a lot of our international engagement is obviously all to do with the Pacific Islands, which experience exactly the same problems that you're all talking about. And it is existential. And that's very much on our doorstep. And the Australia Pacific Step Up is this all of government initiative and so on and so forth. And so I've got a couple of points I want to make here. One, I have a question around whether or not countries like yours on this side of the Indian Ocean are collaborating with Pacific Island countries on frameworks and action plans and what can be done, because you are facing such similar issues. And to get Australia's attention, I think sometimes it needs to be framed in that Pacific side of the conversation, although we do have this other envoy now. So I just want to park that as a question. But the other point I want to make, and again, it goes back to the Pacific and what you're talking, the susceptibility to the domestic politics of the global north is a really interesting dynamic here, because let's take the COP example last week, where Australia was leading a bid for the Pacific Islands to host COP. And Turkey put forward a bid as well, which meant there had to be a negotiation. And Australia seceded, is that the right word? They stepped back from it and said, you know what, Turkey can host it. We're just going to hold we've got some decision-making role. But it was a real sort of step back. And it was really disappointing, because what that means is the Pacific doesn't get to host COP. And the reason why our Prime Minister, if I may, I believe, partly stepped back from it was because the opposition party ripped up the net zero commitment. And so they read the domestic politics and went, let's not push COP. And then the Pacific is the one that suffers. So there's this dynamic as well that I find quite interesting. And it's about ensuring that you're able to be sort of brought forward in that and not relying on Australia's domestic politics. So there's a Pacific Indian Ocean connection there that I want to draw, but I think we might go to questions in the room now, if that's okay with our panellists, because we'd love to hear how you're thinking about these issues and what sort of questions this spurs up in your mind. So there's some microphones. I mean, we all know the drill. There's one over here. There's one over here. I think we've got someone coming to the microphone. If you want to line up at the microphone as well, I think we've got plenty of time for questions. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Masanori Kobayashi from Sasaka Peace Foundation, Japan. I thank you for the interesting discussions. And just follow up to the Maldives issues, and I would like to know more about this waste management issues. I think small island, this waste management is one of the really a challenge, and particularly the country that depend on the tourisms. You have more tourists than local inhabitants, and this waste of providing food and also supplying electricities, some household items, electric appliances, all of these things, if they are not going to be used any longer in the country, there's no way to go. And I think now the Pacific Island countries are discussing how this circular economy can be embedded in the sustainable waste management or resource management. And I'm just wondering how you perceive these waste management issues, particularly in context of maybe sub-regional, regional corporations using that systems to build regional circular economy systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we take a second question and then we'll come back to our panel.
Hello, thank you everybody so much for such an interesting discussion. My name is Stella Savidis. I'm a Stellenbosch student at the university here. And I wanted to ask, particularly around tourism, in South Africa, it's one of our large industries, but equally in many island countries. So how do we balance our environmental concerns with economic effects and needing some of that economic effects? I dare separate them because it feels like it actually should be one issue that we're tackling at the same time. But particularly, I can imagine for many island nations that large resorts and international meddling, for lack of a better word, plays a large role, particularly in climate and ocean protection. And so how do we navigate that, but also how do we support island nations in discussing tourism as well as climate change and the environment as one issue that we need to solve at the same time? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a great question about tourism. It crosses over many of your countries. Shivan, do you want to take that one on about tourism, and then we'll pass to Malshi and about perhaps on the...
Sure, I think you're going to get a lot more insight
yeah.
from because Sri Lanka has a lot more capacity for its tourism. We are barely scratching the surface of its capacity, so we've not really, to be honest, experienced the negativities of their tourism. So we want a lot more tourists, but I think the smaller islands have experienced it right now, and they might be in a better position to answer.
Yep, so Seychelles has reached its capacity for tourism. The government has actually imposed a moratorium on large hotels on our main island, and the Seychelles has traditionally, and also through policy, only approved hotels that are 4 or 5 stars, and now we also have 7 stars. So when I tell you that we have the Waldorf, we have the Shangri-La coming in, we have the Louis Vuitton brand, we do not entertain anything below a 4-star, but that's slowly starting to change as well, because as you're well aware, a high-end tourist who's coming in to spend money in the Seychelles tends to stay in the hotel, do only what the tour operator has marked him or her down for, and then leaves the country. So very little money is actually entering the pockets of a local Seychellois. So apart from the moratorium, we are also now pushing towards eco-friendly resorts or boutique hotels with very much reduced room capacity. That's happening as well. And then Seychelles has also introduced a levy for tourists. So every night, something below $1 a night is what a tourist has to pay now to come to the Seychelles, and that money goes towards a conservation fund aimed at restoring or conserving, or even perhaps offsetting the tourists' impact in the country. But I will say that tourism remains one of the biggest sectors for the Seychelles. It is an unfortunate thing that even during COVID, the opportunity was not taken to diversify the sector further because tourist arrivals just dropped off the cliff. And some things that the government is trying to do is move away from tourism and find other ways to grow. Thanks.
Malshi, who profits then? Are they joint ventures with local companies, or does the money then... the money that within the tourism industry, like you mentioned, it's all 7-star, 5-star hotels. Is that money then going somewhere else, or is it joint ventures with local Seychelles-owned companies?
So correct. There's a lot of profit that gets repatriated overseas. One of the very common problems that we face, because a lot of the chains that are coming in are obviously international. We have very little by way of local ventures that can compete or even set up the infrastructure necessary for that kind of thing. Yeah.
Aisha, did you want to have a go at either of those questions on the tourism or the waste management piece from a Maldives perspective?
I think the Maldives is doing a fantastic job in waste management. We've started long back exporting plastics, and unfortunately, a lot of plastics that land in the Maldives come from different other countries as well. Some of the countries, sadly, even now, they don't take ocean as a living, place, but they take oceans as a dumping dustbin. Some of the people, they do it, but in the Maldives, it's taken very, very seriously. We have built island community level waste management systems where the waste is changed to energy. And also, we always have beach cleanings, reef cleanings, and, as you said, like diving. There's 2 types of divings. That's the technical diving, and the leisure diving. But in Maldives, we have the reef cleaning diving. You know, it's part of our culture. We've been always cleaning. We are one of the cleanest countries in the earth, even centuries back. And I think no one can deny it. We are small countries, but we are the paradise in the earth. And I think I've never come across anyone when I say I'm from the Maldives, or this is in my bucket list. If anyone is here who doesn't have Maldives in their bucket list, can you please put your hands up? I would tell answers. So I think people love Maldives, and I think the larger countries who has the funds should take this seriously. That Sri Lanka, as I said, and my counterpart said, Sri Lanka has a lot of scope of tourism, which is very true, and it's very different. And Mauritius, Seychelles, we are coming from tourist destinations, and for us, ocean is just not, a commodity, but it's our life, it's our everyday life, it's our money, it's our economy, it's our life, like everything goes to ocean. So for us, cleaning the ocean, managing the waste is number one priority, and it is part of our national security. Thank you.
Thank you. And Janitha, you wanted to add to this one as well?
Thanks. Just to pick up on the point that Siobhan put forward in terms of the shipping sector itself. South Africa does not have its own commercial fleet, but nonetheless, we're quite a player in that space in terms of providing infrastructure. So of recent, our state-owned entities have been looking into how do they provide the infrastructure for clean fuels. And this is where the green hydrogen discussion comes in. So this is an area that in the medium to long term, South Africa will definitely be prepared to offer that type of service to shipping that's passing through the borders of South Africa. But on the point of tourism levies, we've had it in place for a very long time. In terms of eco-lodges, this is an area that South Africa also provides. It depends on what the tourist is looking for. And over and above that, in terms of sustainability principles that the hospitality sector has brought on board, from energy efficiency to water efficiency, etc., I think a lot of responsibility also depends on the tourist that's visiting that destination, and how is it that they want to leave that place in terms of their footprint. Thanks.
Yep, fantastic, thank you. Do we have any other questions from our audience? We've got one over there, I think. Yep. So I've got a very bright light shining in my face from that side of the room, so it's hard to see. Over to you.
All right, good morning. My name is Julius Buchana. I'm a journalist and a foreign policy analyst from Uganda. I would like to zoom out a little bit on the topic and ask a question on the access to the sea. President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni of Uganda recently mentioned in his campaign trail that Uganda owns the Indian Ocean, yet Uganda is landlocked. And if you look at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 125 says the landlocked countries have the freedom and also should be given the freedom to access the sea through transit, security and all that. The countries that are next to the seas most of the time make trading more stringent to the countries that are landlocked. I'd like to ask a question to either Maldives or Seychelles. How have you made it easy for the countries that are maybe opposite or around the sea to make it easy for them to trade with you? Thank you so much.
UNCLOS. It's a very fun topic. Welshi. The question is around access to trade through the Seychelles. Okay. Yeah.
Right. So your question was about landlocked countries or countries close to Seychelles? Okay, I can only speak from the Seychelles experience and what we've done. I believe that we've opened up trading routes with Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, but I'm not too sure about Uganda, and I'm really sorry that my knowledge is a little bit limited on this. I only know also that access for Seychelles should not really be much of an issue because we import 90% of our goods, and we have imported chicken from Brazil. So I'm pretty sure that when it comes to mainland Africa, there shouldn't be that much of a limitation if we had like-minded partners who wanted to trade with the Seychelles. It's my opinion that access with respect to Seychelles should not be much of an issue. I will put that point forward. But I think you also asked about neighboring regions. So for us, our policy when it comes to trade and diplomatic relations is basically friends to all. Seychelles cannot afford to forego potential for partnerships. So even with our closest neighbor, Mauritius, who is also our closest competitor, but is miles away ahead of us in terms of some sectoral development, we partner more than we fight. And I'll point to two examples for this. One would be the Seychelles Island issue, which Britain, I believe, has recently handed back ownership of those islands to Mauritius. However, if you look at it from a geographic point of view, Seychelles does have a slight proximity closer to the Seychelles than it does to Mauritius. However, our international and diplomatic stance on this has been to support Mauritius in its advocacy for ownership of the Seychelles Islands. The Seychelles has publicly supported Mauritius on this, and there is no question that for us, this will not become a point of conflict between two neighboring countries. The second is the fact that we share a continental shelf. We've signed a joint management agreement in which we are agreeing to explore and potentially develop part of our oceans together. So for us, I believe, yes, there might be a question of access in that particular perspective that you have raised, but I also believe that from the Seychelles perspective, we are open to trade.
Thanks very much. You've got 10 seconds, Siobhan.
Oh, gosh. Well, okay, I'm going to give me a minute.
I can see Paul Kit stood up. She's over there.
Okay. Well, very quickly, UNCLOS Article 76 basically provides rights for nations with an extended continental shelf beyond its exclusive economic zone for seabed resources, but anything above that is not captured within that article. And freedom of navigation makes the whole world, gives access to the whole world to land masses anywhere between that territory. But what Sri Lanka, for example, has applied for is under the UNCLOS Article 76, which is an internationally accepted rule, that it should be given the extent of its continental shelf that naturally extends beyond its 200 miles of exclusive economic zone. Thank you.
There's your technical answer from Siobhan. Thank you very much for ending our panel for us today, Siobhan. I think we have to finish because ORF team are staring at me. But I do want to thank you all for your really interesting perspectives. I think that this is a really interesting conversation. There's a lot to unpack here. And so thank you all for bringing your perspectives today. Thank you for your fantastic questions. And we'll see you outside for more conversations, I hope. Thank you.